Good afternoon, Vikings. Welcome to another edition of the Quarantine Chronicles here with Mr. Brown. This is U.S. History Daily Video Lesson number 5. Not entirely sure, but today we're continuing our discussion on the Industrial Revolution. We wrapped up our discussion on Manifest Destiny a couple videos ago, and now we are moving on to the Industrial Revolution. Remember that our history is not chronological. Just because we're talking about the Industrial Revolution after we're talking about Manifest Destiny doesn't mean that the Industrial Revolution took place after Manifest Destiny. It was something that these are things that were going on at the same time. And like we said yesterday, the Industrial Revolution actually made Manifest Destiny possible. But we can only, to keep from confusing us, we can only talk about one topic at a time as we move forward, as we make a curriculum for school. So we talked about how Samuel Slater brought his knowledge of the factory of the working mill over from Great Britain and into New England, on how the first factories, the first mills were made in the northern states and in New England in particular. We talked about how in the South, the Industrial Revolution looked a lot different. Yeah, there was the introduction of machinery. And yeah, we even had a few mills, but most of its impact in the South was still about farming, still concerned farming. So we had an introduction of a new plow that made farming easier. We had the introduction of the cotton gin, but the introduction of the cotton gin just made the need for slaves and for plantations even greater. But at the same time, this same Industrial Revolution didn't look the same from north to south, because the cultures of the United States in northern United States, the northern states, and the southern states was extremely different, and its impact in the Industrial Revolution was felt differently. So as we're going through our discussion, and you're going through the assignments that that are assigned for the Industrial Revolution, a couple of things to remember and a couple of things to consider. The Industrial Revolution took people from their towns, from their homes in rural areas, and moved them into factories in cities. So today we see cities like Tampa, we see cities like Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, huge cities all over the world and all over the United States. But before the Industrial Revolution, many places were more ruralized and more spread out and not so focused centrally in one place. And that didn't happen until the Industrial Revolution, when these factories were built, and you had these mill towns that were built around these factories that invited people to come in and live close to where they work. Farming, again, we talked about the fact that a new plow was made, and it made farming easier, and food production grew. That made the need for growing food lessen a bit, in a sense, or it wasn't a need for as many people to be farming, because a few people could produce mass amounts of food. We didn't need everybody to be at home on farms. So these people were started to leave their farms and leave their homes in ruralized areas, and started to move into urbanized areas or cities, so that they could work in these factories. And these factories, because they were so large and because the production was so needed, these factories were able to employ thousands upon thousands of people. And along with employing those people, these factory owners also made these mill towns. So they built housing, they built stores. They made it so that these people didn't have to go very far in order to live their lives and to make their money. But at the same time, these factory owners were able to accumulate mass amounts of wealth, because of the fact that everything that these people are involved with involves the factory owner. Yeah, I'm gonna have to pay you out of my pocket. If I'm the factory owner, I have to pay you for the work that you do in my factory. But then what are you going to use that money for? What are you going to use your paycheck for in the 1700s, in the 1800s? Keep in mind that there's no TV, there are no video games. Our entertainment is very limited. Um, Movie theaters, I'm not sure when they crop up, but you don't see too many, if any, movie theaters in the 1800s. You definitely don't see any in the 1700s. So these people didn't have many ways of entertaining themselves. So most money was spent on food and clothing, um, and transportation if you needed it. But most people weren't going very far because mass and fast transportation was not available. Um, so if I'm a factory owner, a mill owner, and I have a store, a grocery store, and then a clothing store, and then maybe a pharmacy, all in the same community, and I'm providing housing for my workers, then that means that the money that I'm paying these workers as they work in my factories is going to get paid back to me when they have to go to my store to buy the materials that they need to live, including food and clothing and whatever else. So as I just stated, um, factories brought people from the country to the city. And we started to see the growth of these cities uh, in a drastic way. City populations increased drastically because more people were moving into these cities to be close to their work. But along with just not only Americans, you did also start to see mass immigration coming in because people were coming to work in these factories or to find work in America in general. Um, you did see some Asian people or some Asian people come over to the United States. They weren't so much working in the factories as much as trying to work on the railroads. Now there are and in the mines in the West. Now, there were some working in factories, but most Asian people who came were working on railroads and I'm sorry, and in the mines, the gold mines out west. But you did have German immigrants. You did have other European immigrants moving into the United States on the east side to move into these factories. So we saw an immigration boost during the um, Industrial Revolution. And that was because there were more jobs available and steady jobs for these people to work when farming started to go left, south, or not be needed as much. Um, with having all of these people in these factories and with having these factories built up so fast, the factories weren't in the best condition. And we'll talk about factory conditions here in this short PowerPoint. To start the PowerPoint, though, I want to talk about the jungle. Actually, we'll talk about the jungle at the end of the presentation. So, talked about a mill town yesterday. As you can see, the mill, the factory is in the back. Here's where the goods, the textiles are produced. Here you see some housing. This is where these mill workers, these factory workers would go home to these apartment homes and then pay their rent to the boss that's paying them to work in the factories. This is a slightly more modern picture. That's why you see some vehicles over here. In our history, we don't have motorized vehicles yet. So a lot of these factories employ children. That includes female children as well as male children. Um, think about what the benefit was for hiring a child over hiring an adult, or even hiring a female worker over hiring a male worker. What could a factory owner benefit from hiring a child over an adult? Some more images of children. So yeah, you can look at size and maybe a child could go to some places that an adult couldn't, but think deeper. Think deeper, not just the physical capabilities of children as opposed to adults, because I think on the whole, an adult in a factory is going to be physically able to do more than a child. So what is the factory owner actually trying to do or trying to accomplish by hiring children instead of adults? More children. This guy, I'm hoping he's grown, or at least a teenager. I know people looked a little older back then, but we can definitely see that these are children working in the factory. Not entirely sure what they produce. Some of these look like cotton looms, textile looms. So we meet Furman, Furman Owens. Furman is 12. Furman can't read and doesn't know his ABCs. Furman says he wants to learn, but he can't because he works all the time. And Furman has been in the mills for 4 years, which would tell us that Furman was 8 years old when he first started working in these mills. So yesterday we talked about the fact that a lot of children, or I'm sorry, in your Nearpod activity, it talks about the fact that a lot of children started working at 7 years old. Already we look at Furman, and Furman has at 12 years old has almost as many years on his job as I have on mine at 32. I'm sorry, 31. But Furman, one of the negative consequences to the Industrial Revolution and to having children in these factories is, yes, they can make money and they can help out their families, but at the same time, he's not going to be very well educated because he can't go to school. So Furman, think about it, without Furman being able to be educated and working in these factories, think about the ramifications of that. Think about the types of jobs that Furman will be able to have in his life because he started working at such a young age. A group of children outside of their mill, either getting ready, they look kind of neat. So maybe they're getting ready to go to work versus having gotten off of work. You might think they look a little dirty, dingy, but remember, this is a time before central plumbing. Not everybody was able to take baths on a daily, consistent basis. Some more children in a factory. Not sure what they're producing here. But these images are just to give you an idea of what working conditions were like for kids that are around your age or even younger than you. Thankfully, today we look at the fact that at 13, 14, 15, we're still in school, in a school building most of the day, and we're trying to be educated or trying to gain an education. Now, there are some of us that then have to go home and do things to help out our families. But at the same time, we weren't doing those things for 8 hours out of the day. We're still able to go to school and get an education before we have to go back and help our families. All right, now, if this is that same group of children, now it looks like it's quitting time. It looks like they put in a hard day's work. Another newspaper boy. Looks like in the middle of a big city. Before these factories and mills went up in a drastic way and were built everywhere, and most people started working then in those places. Textiles are usually produced out of the home. So here we see a family unit producing textiles at home at their dinner table. Now, just because those factories were created and put up doesn't mean that they stopped having families working on textiles at home. Think about some conditions that you might face on an assembly line. First, you have to think of what an assembly line is. And then think about some conditions that you might face on the assembly line. Excuse me. So, descriptions of an assembly line. So these are the motivations, what they're trying to accomplish. They're hoping that the work is completed quickly. With an assembly line, the work is simple, it's basic, and it's low skill. Because the work is so simple and so easy, though, these workers can be easily replaced. And then 4, low skill jobs equal a large pool of workers, which then equates to not having to pay your workers a whole lot. So I talk to you guys in class all the time, and we talk about the purposes of school and the purposes of doing what you're supposed to do in school. And this description of the assembly line kind of speaks to that point. I make the joke all the time. I tell you, look, I get paid decently. I live a comfortable life based on what I make at my job, and I get paid just to sit there and talk to you for 8 hours a day. So And that's the benefits of my education. Now, here in this, as we look at this description of an assembly line, it tells you there's a lot of jobs out here where the work is so easy and it makes the workers easier to replace. So, and because these there are such a large amount of people who can complete this task, then they don't have to pay you a whole lot because they know that there are going to be plenty of people out there who need a job and are more than willing to step in and do your job and only need limited training. So when you're in school, pay attention, do what you need to do so that you can get a job that a lot of people can't say that they can do. I know a lot of us have dreams, aspirations of working for ourselves, and that's cool too. But for those of us who are going to not start our own business, you want to be able to step forward and have a job that a lot of people can't do, because then you can command a higher pay price and then you can command a sense of security in your job because you're not easily fired simply because you don't show up to work on time, because there aren't a lot of people who can do your job. Something to think about. So, oh yeah. So The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. Uh, Upton Sinclair was a writer. He wrote a novel called The Journal The Jungle, that talked about factory conditions, more specifically factory conditions in large cities like Chicago, and even more specifically in meat factories. So if you, I'll post a short little blurb of his novel on Edsby if you want to take a look at it. It's very eye-opening as to the conditions in these factories and the conditions that these workers had to go through, and it'll give you a sense of why we have the labor laws in place today in 2020, um, because of the different factory conditions and the terrible conditions that these workers had to work through in factories in the 17 and 1800s. And then we can take some time, if you know somebody who works in a factory, you can take some time to compare those conditions, because I'm sure today in 2020, somebody who might work in a factory will still have complaints about their job and complaints about the conditions in their job. So we can take those, we can compare those complaints to the complaints that workers had in the 1700s and the 1800s as industrialization got kicked off. I think that is about it for today's lesson. Um, Come back tomorrow. Remember that these are simply for some extra information. Unless I tell you straightforward, there'll never be an assignment in here, but this is just something that we can, to give you a little bit more clarity on the assignments that you're already working on. See you guys tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day.